Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the I Can Fly podcast. Today, I'm super excited to share with you a great conversation with my dear friend Chet Scott, who we've had on before, and Tom Ryan, the head wrestling coach at The Ohio State University. Tom wrote an amazing book here called Chosen Suffering that you can find, but I'm really excited for you guys to listen to this conversation. We dive into what it really means to choose your own suffering every day, these different topics and disciplines that you can do in your own life to start to develop that mental toughness, so it prepares you for the unchosen suffering moments in life, the true moments of truth, where your faith in both God or yourself or whatever you put your faith in are really tested. And I also think that for me, as I've gone on my own spiritual testimony in finding Christ, this is an amazing conversation where we hear the testimonies of both Chet and Tom Ryan about who God is in their life and what their journey to God has been like for them. Ultimately, we also get into an incredible story for each of them where they were each present in a moment of, death, frankly, where Chet had a life-threatening heart attack that Tom was there present for. And then just this past year, Coach Ryan was involved in a car accident that almost took his life, and Chet was one of the first people on the scene there. So I'm confident that you'll enjoy this episode and also learn a tremendous amount that you can take away and apply to your own life. Thank you for listening, and enjoy this episode. All right, well, thank you guys so much for being here. This is really a fun treat for me, Chet. We've done an episode before. I think it was back in episode 16, and about probably a year and a half or so ago, I had the first chance to meet Grappy, Tom Ryan here, and I know you guys have a really special relationship. So that was really the idea in doing this together, the three of us. But first, just thank you guys very much for being here, and Tom, seriously, thank you for your time.
It's good to be with you. Yeah.
So
yeah,
happy to be here.
And Chet.
And so, our audience, of course, knows Chet from being on the show. But just as kind of a way of a first introduction, Coach, can you just tell me a little bit about, you and where you grew up and how eventually came into being the coach here at Ohio State?
I'm grew up on Long Island, New York. My big dream was NBA, and I'm wrestling. So in seventh grade, I was cut from the basketball team by Mr. O'Leary. I'll never forget his whistle, his white roped and whistle around his neck. He cut me from the basketball team and said that your list of the skills you have, aggression, bad shooter, foul a lot, would fit probably much better on a wrestling mat than on a basketball court. So he said, try wrestling. So I tried wrestling. My brother was 2 years older. He started wrestling. And quite frankly, the first day in the room, first I was like, I'm not wrestling. The singlet kind of threw me off a bit. As a kid, I didn't want to really wear that. The uniform was a little bit odd for me. My brother said, you practice in shorts and a T-shirt. You'll be fine. Just get in the room and see if you like it. And I was 75 pounds in seventh grade. So it's a brilliant sport for someone that's one more size. In the sport, you've seen that Unstoppable just came out. It's a movie with about Anthony Robles, who won the Nationals with one leg. So it's a unique sport, where all sizes, shapes are welcome. And so I started wrestling in seventh grade, and without question, the first day in the room was like magical. Fell in love with it immediately.
And how old were you at that point?
I was in seventh grade. So how old are we in seventh grade?
12,
I'm not
13
sure.
years
12 or
old.
13.
Yeah.
Fell in love with it. Loved the one-on-one. I loved that I was competing against somebody my own size. So never thought I'd be coaching at Ohio State in seventh grade, but certainly it was all about how much fun it was and the one-on-one and the physicality of it. And you could sometimes I got in trouble in the playground here and there, so it was nice to be able to fight, legally and not get in trouble for it. So it was fun, and just wrestled through high school on Long Island, and then followed my brother to Syracuse. He was I wanted to go to the University of Iowa badly. I went to camp there every summer, and that's really when I learned a lot about hard work. A guy named Jay Robinson ran these 1-month intensive camps and really helped me connect hard work to success, the work-reward relationship. Wanted to go to Iowa. They never called. Had a couple setbacks in high school and then, went to Syracuse, was there for a couple of years, transferred to Iowa. And
Right.
things started to happen. And really blessed that wrestling found me and I found wrestling.
I mean, when I got to Ohio State, I started on the golf program in 2016. I mean, you guys were rock stars at that time, just coming off a national championship in 2015. Kyle Snyder was, one of the main guys on campus, of course, going on to win Olympic gold that year in 2016. But talk to me a little bit about just that transition, though, of originally getting hired at Ohio State. I mean, I imagine to get called in, what was the program like when you first got there? Was it the powerhouse that you built it to be, or what was that transition like?
When I graduated from the University of Iowa in 1992, I took an assistant coach, and it's like, as a college student, it's like, well, what do I want to do with my life? And I was studying education, I was thinking about physical therapy, and then at the Big Ten championships, my senior year at the Big Tens, which is in March, which is a couple of months before graduation, the head coach of Indiana asked me at the tournament, he said, "Are you interested in coaching?" That's the first time that it's like, maybe I love wrestling. Like, this would be great. Maybe I'll coach in college. So, I mean, that was kind of where the journey began. I say, I'll take a look after the season. I'll come and take a look at Bloomington, in Bloomington at the University of Indiana. So I coached there for 2 years, met my wife there in my second year coaching there. So that was a really positive thing to come out of Bloomington. Took that gem. And we moved to New York. The Hofstra on Long Island is a small Division I program, Hofstra University. So I was there for 11 years when the Ohio State job opened up. And at the time, Ohio State was struggling a little bit. This state is one of the premier states in the country in terms of producing top wrestlers. So everybody called it the sleeping giant. Who's going to awaken the sleeping giant? And we moved out here. It was a great opportunity for us, and it was a whirlwind. Quite frankly, at the time, there was a lot of stuff going on in our lives. My wife and I had just lost a child a year before then. So, I would say I was kind of faking it for a while more than anything. Life was really hard at that time for us. But I lived in my office for a little bit because Lynn and the family were still back in New York. So I got a blow up mattress and just sat in the office and just started to plan out, what I thought Ohio State needed to become a national power.
Man. And prior to that, Chet, to bring you into the fold here, we started working together with Built to Lead, just over a year and a half ago or so, like I was saying when I first met Tom. But significantly prior to that, you guys met. And so just for those who haven't seen our episode together, Built to Lead is an amazing leadership practice that you started after years first in a corporate setting and then stepping out to go into the world of coaching and helping individuals become the best leaders they can be. That then branched into working with sports teams as well. And it started, I believe, with the wrestling program. Is that right?
Yeah.
So, I'd love, how long into the relationship with, or how many years had you been the coach at Ohio State before Built to Lead started?
Yeah, we met in 13.
Okay.
Towards the end of 13. And you started in 09, right? Yeah.
06.
06, okay.
Yeah, I was here for maybe 8 years before I met Chet.
Yeah.
And it was just as his foray into coaching was the power of suggestion. My decision to get into sports was the power of suggestion. One of my clients, who Chad, was a former wrestler. He didn't last long. He made it 1 year, but he was a former wrestler, and he still thinks he's a wrestler. He's one of those guys. And he had gone to a YPO event featuring Urban Meyer and yours truly. And after the YPO event had concluded, all these young presidents scurried up to see Urban and, talk to him. And Grap's up there by himself. And Chad, being, the former wrestler, went up to kind of bail him out and started talking to him and telling him about, hey, from what you talked about, you'd probably like this Built to Lead program that we're using at our company. You got to come check it out. And I don't know if that was just the power of suggestion for those two, or if he really meant it, but Grappy took him up on it. And next thing I know, he's showing up at one of our Built to Lead team practices for my business client, and just put him to work. And next thing you know, we're working together.
Yeah. I
mean, and haven't looked back.
Yeah. And what's cool for me as kind of the third person in the room, with this and knowing each of you is, I recently had the opportunity to read your book for the first time, and there is so many parallels between the core thesis around becoming Built to Lead and your book and Chosen Suffering. Mm-hmm. And I would love to explore that topic more. That honestly, that if there was a theme, I'd say for this conversation in total, it is this idea of chosen versus unchosen suffering. Mm-hmm. And as I read the book, like what became kind of abundantly clear to me is that in choosing our own suffering, it is preparing us for the inevitable unchosen sufferings to come in life. Mm. And I feel like wrestling as a sport, that's the ultimate chosen suffering, right? You're literally choosing to step into the ring with somebody. But, maybe, Grappy, I'd love to hear a little bit of background as to not necessarily why you read why you wrote the book, but what really started to build in your coaching experience that instilled this idea in why someone should choose suffering in their life?
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with Chet.
Yeah.
And the reason why I was attracted to Chet in his thinking.
Yeah.
So the first for me is, you're kind of picky about who you let into your circle. And after meeting Chad, I went and watched a Built to Lead practice, as Chet said, but also, which blew me away, just the openness and of the team he was leading. I just couldn't believe how open these people were with each other. Mm-hmm. And it blew me away. Like, man, I need more of that, more communication among my team, just sharing openly with each other and not being offended when someone challenges you. But the thing also that what drew me to Chet was actually chosen suffering. Yeah. So I went and worked out with them in the morning, and I just believe that if you can't manage discomfort, then you can be brilliant and you can change the world, but you're not going to be in my inner circle. Right. So it's just something, it's a belief that I have that I just want to surround myself with people that kind of walk the walk and live it. And when I went to work out with them, I was pretty fit, and I went to work out with them, and I don't think I could smile or cough or move freely for like 3 or 4 days after this core workout. I was so sore.
Yeah.
I was dying. And there's a bunch of guys in there that are just, crushing their core, their literal core. Right? Is it literal? Mm-hmm. Their core, your abs. And it was like, wow, these guys, they're tough. They're tough. So that was first. I believe I did that before I went to see what he does at Built to Lead. I want to know what he's like made of, And so I was impressed. I'm like, wow, he's really a tough person. Mm-hmm. And even though he doesn't look it, he is.
It's so great.
So and it's like you don't know what's under behind door number 3.
Yeah.
And I saw what was behind the curtain. So that really attracted me to him. And then it was just going to his practice. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if so what was the original question?
Actually I haven't interjected.
And then the chosen suffering.
Yeah, right? but my question, because Chet and I actually had a practice today, and one of the things we're talking about with me is really the the challenge in building persistence in some capacity. It's that skill set, and I think it is a skill set that regardless of the outcome, you continue to, press on and press forward. And what I was curious about, and like you recognize that trait in Chet, do you think that's something you can train into someone?
Yeah, I would say that's an interesting question. And I would say, I think our belief system is based to some degree on our experiences. And for me, as a 7th grader, they moved me up to varsity wrestling in 8th grade. And I wanted to be great.
Yeah.
So my lens was only at those who were great. That's who I was looking at. I wasn't concerned ever with, quite frankly, with the one that didn't want to be great. My eyes were on the ones that want to be great. And there was a kid in my high school named Kenny Meadows. And Kenny was the best guy in the team. And I was an 8th grader. They moved me up to varsity in 8th grade. So immediately it was, who's the best guy in the room? Is Kenny Meadows. So let me ask Kenny questions. Kenny, how'd you get so good? Why are you wrestling at a level that right now I can't comprehend? And he said, I go to this camp. It's a 1-month camp over the summer. It's called the J. Robinson Intensive Wrestling Camp. He was a Ranger, he was an Olympian, and his camp was designed to connect people to what their capacity is in terms of suffering. How much, it was 4 workouts every day, 6:30, around 11, 3, and around 7:30 at night. It's with 4 workouts a day. And I wanted to go because this guy was an animal, and I wanted to be an animal. So early on in my life, I think I just learned to follow those that chose the hard way.
Yeah.
Because everyone in my life that has done well in wrestling chose the hard way. I don't know anybody that didn't. So when you meet people that have no fear of discomfort, it's like, yeah, I want to be around that person.
Yeah. It's definitely something that Chet and I are diving in on together a little bit. And once you start to feel some comfort in your life, it's easy to sit back in that place, I think, but it's not fulfilling. And the ultimate thing I think that any of us are searching for is fulfillment. And so, again, to come back to the title of Chosen Suffering, and in reading the book, I know the answer to this, but do you feel that there is a correlation between fulfillment and this chosen suffering?
I do, and I think the title the title of the book. I know this isn't about the book, but just where I came up with a name was that as much as I feel like in my life, I move toward people like Chet and others that don't mind discomfort and long for it and look for it. That never brought me to my knees. So no matter how hard I worked for something, and wrestling is a non-negotiable. You can be really successful in life, I would say, to some degree, and not choose to be physically miserable, right? But maybe it's emotional, maybe it's mentally challenging. But chosen suffering, was the foundation of becoming an elite wrestler. But never once did I beg for mercy through the choices I made that were difficult. Mercy, I was brought to my knees through unchosen suffering, which is kind of the backbone of the book. And it's the things that are outside your control. For me, that brought me to my knees, and that was the loss of my son at 6 years old.
Yeah.
I never reflected on life until I lost Teague. Until we lost Teague. Now it's, where is he? What's the meaning of life? It was always just wake up in the morning and work hard, and always treat people well. And I wasn't certain there was a God or no God, but that loss, the loss of Teague, for me, I think maybe choosing, people chosen suffering is, listen, you have a drinking problem, a drug problem, you have an addiction. That's chosen suffering as well, and that can bring you to your knees. But that wasn't my story. My story was the unchosen suffering of losing my son that led me to my faith, which, quite frankly, was the most powerful and most important decision I've ever made, which is, and I think it's the most important decision any human being will ever make. It's not where I'm going to live, who I'm going to marry, what my job's going to be. It's, is there a God or not? And should I follow him? Is he worthy of me following him?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where the chosen, unchosen
Sure.
kind of mixes.
Yeah, there was a quote that I pulled out of the book. I was hopeful, and whether we did or not, was going to try to get our conversation to faith at some point, because that's certainly been the biggest journey in my life over the last, especially the last year. Is I've always believed in. I've always been a spiritual person. I've always believed in God, but I didn't necessarily have the objective truth to really believing in the Son of God. And surrendering to Christ in my life and feeling the Holy Spirit come into my body and beyond. I mean, it's been a crazy, spiritual walk over the last year, and I'm in the process of learning to surrender from it or to Him. But there was a quote in your book that I loved, and it's first somebody you quote A.W. Tozer here and saying, "It is doubtful whether God can bless a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply." And then you go on, deep suffering often has a distinct, poignant effect on our lives. It did for me. The chosen suffering for me was deep, but not deep enough. Maybe I wasn't tough enough to initiate the type of pain that unchosen suffering caused me. Welcome to unchosen suffering.
Yeah.
It was just, it was like one of the most highlighted things for me in the book was just obviously the exact story that you just told. And so I mean, you had this coming to your knees moment in your life. Can we have that kind of spiritual access to God without having this moment of total need for Him in some capacity? I'm curious what you both think of that.
I think I've met people that have just been blessed with faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you come across people that just they believe, and it's like, well, what have you? What leads you to really make it your priceless, right? It has for me, it had to become. I'm not saying it was or wasn't priceless, but it wasn't in my train of thought, and then it became every waking moment almost was figuring out the truth, and I wasn't like in search of God. I was just in search of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, maybe there is no God, and maybe it's just it, and maybe Teague is gone. And that's it. And I think if I would have found that, I would have lived with it. I think I don't know this, but I hope I'd have been strong enough to lead my family and raise my children and live a life with a bucket of pain that I can't get rid of, but move forward. I don't know how things would have gone if I didn't find God. I only know the way things went. And the way things went was I found God. My family's doing incredibly well. So for me, just my story was losing in the national finals, getting hurt in the state tournament my senior year, not accomplishing the things I wanted to as a competitor hurt. They hurt. And then they're still with me, right? I want those chances back, but they help you grow. But they never took me to a place to explore something that really has a much deeper meaning than whether you won or not. And that was the single most important question every human being has to wrestle with is there a God? So instead of listening to rock and roll on the way to work every day, I started to pop in, CDs, and I started to read a lot and connected with friends that I had no idea what their faith was. They were acquaintances, and they became great friends, and I would do Bible studies with them in the morning, and they would feed me. I was just so fertile. I was hungry for truth. And it became, for me, and I think for anybody, if you look with an open mind, no pre-assumed anything, I think the answer is pretty clear. There's enough facts. There's facts. Faith, sometimes you got to believe what you can't see. But sometimes, it's like I've never experienced like God, like Jesus has never appeared to me, which disappoints me. I want Him to come to me and show me His face and say, dude, look, I'm right here. I love you. But I can look at human beings. I can point everywhere. It's like He's He's all around me. Like, how did you miss this? Like, you think the pyramids are fancy. We're trying to figure out the pyramids. Well, how do you make that? How do you make a Chet, man? I mean, right? I think this doesn't come from nowhere. Like that's way fancier than any pyramid.
Yeah.
But we're still trying to figure out how the heck the pyramid, like human beings, and it's the world around us is incredible, and you have these God experiences constantly.
Yeah.
That you just take as you just take for granted, or I don't know what you take them as. You don't think deeply enough about how the heck that happened.
Yeah. Now that reminds me, I think it's Romans 12, where it said, Paul says, do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. You know, this whole concept that Christ is in you, the hope of glory. Like when you say, like, you see Christ in Chet and you see Christ in all these things in the world, that's been a very spiritually unlocking concept for me. This idea that the Holy Spirit is inside of us, and that power in that statement. I mean, so yeah. I mean, I could sit here and talk about our faith for a long time, because it's definitely become the kind of the forefront in my life too. And I think, Chet, I want to bring you in here, because this is something that I, not to make this too selfish in my questions, but it's something that I'm wrestling with in my own heart. It's like, now that I am coming to this moment of recognizing the objective truth in who God is and who Christ is and the Holy Spirit and beyond, now what? Meaning, like, okay, you know, if I know where I'm going and I know who I believe in, like, what do I do now in the meantime? You know? But I'm curious how you guys respond to that as believers now for, you know, a long time.
Well, how do you respond to that as a new believer?
I mean, the first thing is, like, when I wake up, I pray to God and just say thank you for the opportunity to live in your creation today. That's the first thing.
That's
and
me too.
Help me serve you today. And secondly, you know, God, help me just give love and compassion to every person I cross today. You asked us to love our neighbor. Love God and love our neighbor. So I feel like those are the two most important things I can do from a what now standpoint.
Right.
So that's how I would answer that question.
Yeah.
But
so I would agree. That's a great start. And I would say persist in that. Start every day and never stop. And keep praying, keep listening, mostly. When you express gratitude that you got to wake up again, just let the Spirit move within you for what else you should be thankful for. And then persist in that. And allow as you pray, allow your presence to get calm and quiet and listen. You know, because, like, I believe that the Spirit is talking to us frequently, but we are so busy that we don't hear. And so when Grappy said, I'd like for Jesus to come down and show me, well, I think, like, that is a real thing. But the dudes I've met that have that depth in their relationship with Christ are the ones that have persisted in just being quiet. This is why we call it a quiet time, that time in the morning. And then get into, it's good you're reading our books, but, get into God's word as another persistence. And again, you can start wherever you want. You can start in the old, you can start in the new, you can start in the letters, but get in there consistently and read. And as you pray and you read, and then do what we're doing here in fellowship with other fellow believers, you talk about it, then the Spirit will move you wherever there's to move you for how you can serve. And as you surrender to that's the whole point of this existence, and you persist in it, like the right doors will open, and the wrong ones will shut, and you'll begin to have more and more belief, which doesn't mean you won't have doubt. You'll probably have more doubt as you believe, and that's just the gig, but it just takes a little more faith. So if you think about belief, the bookends are faith and doubt. And the way we increase our belief and our believability as a believer is increasing our faith. The doubts are going to be there, right? That's just part of the gig. So the life of a believer is not one that once you surrender, you're just always surrendered. No, it's a constant fight, which is why Grappy can relate to it, because it doesn't, we see it all the time and see it in our own life and in the lives of others, where you can get complacent And all of a sudden, you're not as present. You don't pray as frequent. You don't write as much. You don't talk to God as much. You don't get in the Word as much. And before you know it, you're somewhere else.
Right.
And you have more doubts. So again, the way to increase that faith is those spiritual disciplines, time alone, right? Prayer, reflecting, time in the Word, time with other believers, and then time in service, and the faith will go up, and you'll become more believable. Does that make sense?
Of course it does, and it draws parallels to becoming the best wrestler you can be too.
It's no different.
Yeah,
it's never ending.
It's never ending.
And it's I remember. I was raised Catholic. Mom took us to church every week, kicking and fighting. Right, there were 7 of us. We were a blended family growing up. I have an amazing father, but my mom and dad were at 3 kids by the time they were 20 when it didn't work. And mom met another amazing man, my stepfather, who they've been married now for 45 years or so. And she took me to church kicking and screaming. But I never, in all those years, I never settled one much. I went out of responsibility and the demand of my mother. And then it wasn't until I went through this period of really digging in deeply and figuring it out. But ultimately, when I was reading scripture at 36 years old in my bed, I was reading John and the Case for Christ simultaneously. I was reading both.
Yeah.
And I was reading John with a broken heart. And I couldn't believe what pulled me in was the love. I never felt like the love pulled me in. And the Case for Christ was a great book written by Lee Strobel, who I later met and got to introduce on an event, which is another God wink. Incredible meeting him. But ultimately, it's like I want to be more like him and less like me. Way more like him and a lot less like me.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way, right, to become more like him is to hold on to him, right? And just it's never ending. And since I've met him at 36, almost 20 years have passed, and I've let go of him at times. And every time I do, things don't go as well as when I'm holding them.
Right.
So when I'm holding on to it, and it's like, training, or like you said, with like wrestling. 1 year you have a great season because you stuck to your I believes and the things that and then the next year you're off a little bit because you stop coming in the mornings and you stop doing the things that got you to where you were. And that's right. That's the big oomph that we need, is just to stay with them and be with them all the time and read and learn. And so, yeah.
It's good.
It's amazing. I mean, beyond maybe a step past the faith component, which I think, like to quote C.S. Lewis, who Chet first turned me on to, first things first, don't make second things second. Like, it's one of the all-time quotes. I mean, if you put God first, truly following him raises the bar for everything else in your life. But if you're not there yet, that's kind of where to switch gears for a little bit. Like, how can someone who's not in a sport directly, or an athlete, or someone younger in their life, how can they start to adopt these little things in their life, or maybe they're choosing a suffering of some sort to grow? And why would you? Like, if you're just comfortable in where you're going about, like, why would you encourage someone to start waking up earlier to work out, or whatever it is? Do you understand what I'm asking? It's an obvious answer in some capacity, but I'm curious from your experience.
Yeah. Can you,
I think he's asking, why would someone want to choose suffering?
Yeah. So, I think, when I talk to my team about chosen suffering, it sounds so heavy and dark and like dreary. Like, I don't want that. Like, that sounds awful.
Right.
But, I think the term chosen suffering was for me, became like real when it's like, well, look what Christ did for us. Right. So that's right. That's chosen suffering too. And that was done out of a love that I can't comprehend. right? It's a love that as much as my human heart, I love things. Like I love my grandkids. Like I would gladly die for them, but I would never let them die for me. Like I would never put them in, like I just wouldn't do that, right? There's just no way. So what he did for us is so incredibly powerful, but it stems from love. So the challenge is to find something you love deep enough that you're willing to suffer enough for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now I got thrown into that because I thought I was a basketball player, and I found this sport called wrestling that I just fell in love with. So there really was not much I wouldn't do. If a coach said run 10 miles a day, I'd run 10 miles a day. If he said go to this camp or that camp, there's nothing I wouldn't do, because it was the suffering was founded in this love I have for it. So I think it was, for me, very organic. Organic in where I found my love. Now, I mean, I've raised 3 children, and it's like, well, I don't know. Like I don't know what I love right now. Like I don't just stay in his shadow, and until you figure it out, and it'll come. It'll come, and I've seen it come for all of my children. Chet helped Jake find. Jake was an elite athlete and a great wrestler. He didn't love it the way I loved it. He liked it a lot, and he was really good at it. But his love for it, like it's got to pour out, So Chet helped Jake get some clarity on what it is he loved, and he's now doing incredibly well in business, and my daughter was the same. She's now a videographer, and my son got in the business, but now he's on fire for God, Jordan, my oldest son, on fire great. For him. So he found it through staying in a lane, and he came across some people that are believers, and he's interested. Even though his dad was a believer, he's like, well, dad's, and then he found it from other people, and so I think that the deep, I don't know, I think we all need to find this, and we're all different, right? So you need to find all of my children are different. They're different than me, and it's like finding this thing that you love so much that there's not much you wouldn't do to make it happen.
Yeah. I wonder too, in the world that you're in, like children, in some ways it spawns beyond just your direct children. Like you've got all these kids that you've coached over the years that I'm sure in some capacity you see as children in the world. And, with coaching, I mean, I've been so blessed to be impacted by great coaches in my life. I had a great teacher early on in my golf career, Darren May, who was kind of my first, really instructional, swing coach that I worked with for 10 years. He's deeply fundamental to the person I became. And then Jason Goldsmith came into my life. He introduced me to meditation when I was 19. Yeah, I mean, that dude's coached me more about life than anything to do with golf. Right. We talk every week still. But coaches, go on to be these incredibly instrumental parental figures in your life. And on the topic of faith with kids that have come through your program, like, how have you watched kids grow up, I guess, in some case, in your program and start to find their faith? I'm sure some started with this foundation of faith, but have you seen some kids actually come into their faith while being in your program? Yeah.
I had a text last night, someone asking me about my faith and can I help lead him in a direction. So it was really, that's, listen, I love talking technique and skill and strength and all these things about coaching. But when someone starts to ask those questions, it fires me up, because I know too that number one, there's nothing more important than figuring this out. And two, when you do, it's going to make you better at everything you do. Right. So, at a public institution, I don't, sitting on the street corner, screaming with a megaphone, scripture typically is not a great way to bring someone to faith.
Yeah.
But it's like, Chet, and like the journey you're on, it's like, just be a good example and make them want to ask you, like, why is your life going the way it's going? What's happening in your life? Like what like this guy's intriguing. I kind of want a little bit of what he has, and then you get to share, this is what it is. This is the foundation, this is my belief system. So there's been a lot of student athletes that have moved toward faith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, this is a question that I've thought about a lot towards each of you guys, because this is ultimately what you're doing. But why do you feel someone's called into coaching? You know, I mean, the idea that you're called in service to others, like in coaching, especially kids. I'm just, I'm curious kind of how, maybe Grappy, you first, like getting into coaching and wrestling, like what was the calling for you to be a coach?
Well, I think, for me, I mean, I was really fortunate. I think I wrestled for one of the best coaches all time in any sport.
Yeah.
So, Chet, we talk a lot about competence, confidence versus competence. And I was extremely, I mean, coming out of college at 21, I was extremely competent in skill and training. Like I had a lot of knowledge from the coach I was under. So I didn't have to retrain in one area.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of other areas that make you a good coach, are way beyond how much skill you know or how competent you are. So, and it was never I didn't, I was born, and at 5 or 6 years old, I'm going to be a wrestling coach. Like it was literally months before I graduated college,
right?
Before that opportunity ever presented itself. But it was just a very natural flow from competitor, to coach under the coach that I had, that Hofstra in Indiana would be interested in someone that was under this, which is right more to who you're hanging with.
Sure.
I was under a legend, and anybody looking for a wrestling coach would say, well, even if he got the drippings of what this man has done, Coach Dan Gable, Olympic champion, he won 20-something national titles. He won every Big Ten title he ever coached in, 26 or 27 of those. I think 19 actual titles. But that, hey, this guy is probably competent in this space. So it was an immediate, for me, move right into coaching.
And you've hired several players of yours or wrestlers of yours on to being on your coaching staff after their wrestling career. What is it that you see in somebody that makes you say this is somebody that should go into coaching?
I think I'm this, and Chet could beat me up if I'm not, but I really feel like I'm very confident in kind of like where I stand in the world. And I think that stems from a mother that was very truthful with me, very honest with me. At 1 year, from like birth to 6 months is an incredibly important time in human development. From 6 months to 2, 3, 4, 5 years, you're developing who you are. And I happen to be given the gift from God of an incredible family, a mother and father that loved me deeply, believed in me, challenged me. When I got cut from the wrestling team, mommy never came in the office and talked to the coach. It was, I got 7 kids, dude, I'm cooking. I just got home from work. Go talk to the coach yourself. So I went in the office and talked to the coach myself. But I think that gave me the foundation that I needed to believe. They believed in me, but it gave me the power to believe in myself. And I think that's something that has helped me a ton.
Well, it's fun to be in the room with both you guys, just because I know the depth of your relationship and the 3P workout gang that you guys have started together. And, Chet, have talked about this a good bit too. And I'm curious to get your thought on this a little bit, but there's definitely been a bit of a cultural shift here in the world over the last year, whether it's been politically or also emotionally. We've seen a huge wave of faith over the last year. It's been called out a ton with our Ohio State football team here over the last, season as well. But there's also been a large shift away from kind of this more woke, soft mindset over the last year, I feel like. And I don't know if we're getting into a sensitive area there or not, but I know it's not in our conversation. And the book Chosen Suffering and Becoming Built to Lead, though it's a deeply empathetic journey, it is definitely not a soft one.
Right.
And I'm curious, as you're seeing this kind of cultural shift in the world, right? And seeing this more of a foundation pushed into like hard work and having to adopt the hard things in life and go after these challenging things. Like, just what are you feeling across your client base, and even in the kids you've worked with and coaching teams over the years too?
I'm, I don't know that if you were to ask me that question, like, what am I seeing now versus what did I see 5 years ago?
Yeah.
What did I see 10 years ago? What did I see 15, 20 years ago? I guess what I would say is, and Grappa, you can give your opinion on this, but his team, I did not want to work with athletes. That I was reluctant to work with athletes. Built to Lead we worked with business owners, CEOs of privately held companies, because I wanted to work in a setting that was where the leader had control. And I thought in sports, especially collegiate sports, which today it's even more so, that the head coaches, I thought when I started with Grappy that they were close to like CEOs. It didn't take me long at all to realize, no, they're not. They're more like middle managers. And so they have compliance, HR, legal, they're administrators, all they're trainers, all trained to tell them how to run their program. And so it is a great leadership challenge that I wasn't sure I wanted to take on, because the CEOs and the business owners I worked with that are private, they're truly more like in charge.
Sure.
Right? Very different animal. And so as I then looked at the athletes that were in that versus the associates as part of a company, I noticed over the 13 years, I guess we've been working with them, that they were not getting mentally stronger. They were just the opposite. And the kind of things that Kyle Snyder, Nate Tomasello, Bo Jordan were, Miles Martin, kind of things that we were talking about in those first year practices, Logan Stever, were very different than 10 years down the road. I didn't hear the word anxiety for 10 years. Now I hear it with we work with 9 teams, not just one. I hear it every practice. I never heard the word panic. I'd heard a little bit about sports psych just as a sidebar. Now I hear about so-and-so. Now every team has a multitude of people involved in sports psych. And so when I tell you that I've seen an erosion in the mental, spiritual, physical fortitude of these athletes, I think it only makes sense that leads to something that is looking like what we're seeing today. There's a spiritual awakening that comes when you kind of go, this isn't working, all right? And somebody else telling me this or going to that is not working. I need some kind of deeper work, which then makes sense. That's where people start to be more open to surrendering spiritually, because none of this other stuff is working. So I've just noticed that as a society, we've just gone so far down another path that it only makes sense that there's a swing toward the other way. And I feel like that's what we're experiencing right now. And I'm not talking political. I'm talking just what I see in sports. And I can remember thinking that I didn't expect that when I was working with sports teams, that we would get into spiritual issues to the degree we've gone. We get into them way more than we do in the business world. And they are the ones driving it, not us. They want to talk about it, to your point with your athlete. And I think that's just the power of young people and them noticing what's going on and looking beyond simple answers. I don't know if that answered your question.
Well, certainly it answers. I think it makes dead on sense as to what's going on today, and that there's this spiritual awakening taking place and a search for real truth.
Yeah.
I watched a documentary. Actually, it was a movie biopic that came out just last year. It's called The Jesus Revolution, and it's a story about the Time magazine cover back in, it was like 1974. that had Jesus on the cover of. It was called the Jesus Revolution. And it was this movement of hippies that came into following Christ through this church in Southern California. And it was a really cool documentary because I related to what I feel like a lot of my generation has, which is this very spiritual connection to God, a very deep desire for experiential events and connection, and but the church has kind of been hard to enter in some cases, especially in more of the institutional settings. And so what this movie did such a beautiful job of displaying was this church that opened their arms to the hippie community through this one guy who was a hippie himself.
I saw that. I saw this.
It's a great movie.
Yeah, it was good.
Right? It was a really interesting story. One of the best
I have not
lines.
seen it.
Great movie. And he talks about, the psychedelic movement. He's like, these are all kids that are searching for God.
Right.
They're just looking at lies to do it. And I've even experienced that in some of my own case. There's a huge psychedelic movement going on right now. And it gives you the opportunity to have an access with the transcendence, but it's a lie to think that that's the only way to get there.
Right.
There isn't a way to get there through objective truth, through the Word of God, and this connection to the Holy Spirit and Christ that can be in you at all times. And there's no need for a pill or something to take to get there.
He's like can you believe that he's asking us these questions about what's behind this movement, and then he's answering them. He's answering them like he's the young, just out of college. He's 27, right, going on 72, and he's answering that question for like the journey you're on yourself.
Yeah,
and you're an anomaly in certain circles, but you're not. And so I think that's pretty cool. I think you're, I think it's at one point, all of us will wake up if we live long enough and say, is this all there is? Every human, whether it's the death of a son or just maybe like the Tiger Woods success where you're world number one and you say, is this all there is?
right.
And you either answer it by going on your knees or you answer it by seeking other great pleasures or other great distractions. Because eventually the human has to come face to face with like, this just doesn't make sense either to deal with this suffering or to deal with this great success and have that be all there is. We want to know there's something more than that.
Yeah.
Hence the book Man's Search for Meaning is one of my favorites to recommend. Because one of the ways you can find meaning is in suffering, the most universal. And he wrote that book after suffering in Auschwitz. And if you haven't read that, that's like got to read it, right? So you asked a question earlier, like, can you get to this place of total surrender without suffering? And we said, we didn't really answer it, but we said, yeah, but there are some people that just have natural faith, right? But I would say for you to truly be a believer, that there's going to have to be some kind of a moment where your faith is tested and you go, oh my gosh, I really do believe this, because without that, you're just guessing throughout your life. And so those will come in different forms. Both of us have had physical moments. I've had a few. I know you've had one, probably had a few more. I've had too many. But we had one that we shared where I didn't know I was having a heart attack and I was having a heart attack. We were cycling and talking at the back of the Peloton in our little Saturday morning group celebrating my 62nd birthday with a 62-mile ride. We picked up young Grapp 13 miles in, and it was a cold morning, and he and I sat in the back talking. And I looked over at him and said, I just don't feel so good. And I remember like it was yesterday, and we're cruising up Red Bank Road, going by the guardrails. And I looked at him again, and I said, when we make the turn, I'm gonna pull over and get off the bike. And it was like somebody shot him out of a cannon. Because I'm going to get the car, we'll be right back. And I'm like, crap, you don't need to do that. I'm fine. And I wasn't, but I didn't really comprehend it. He did. He knew that something was really wrong, and reacted. Probably saved my life, and he also texted some of the guys that were up the road, one of which was a doc, that, hey, come back, Chet's in trouble. And I'm walking my bike heading back to Grappy's house when the rest of the crew came up, and as the doc told me to sit down, which I did, Grappy pulled up in the Buick. It was a beautiful ride, and told me to get in. Mick got in the back seat, and away we went. And long story short, I can remember sitting in that emergency room after Grappy ran every light in Westerville, which he loved. That was like his most funny day, right?
I was grateful for that day.
Yeah, you were grateful for that. He had a good time. And I'm sitting there after they've been giving me nitroglycerin, and now they're on the second shot of morphine. And my mind immediately went to Saving Private Ryan. When they gave the dude the second morphine, it was because they knew he was gone, and they wanted him to go in peace. And my brain just went, okay, I don't know what's going on, but it must be serious. And so I was like, I got my little prayer out, and I said, hey God, I'm ready to come home, but I really don't want to leave. And just then, the crew that goes up into your heart to break your clots came in and said, we're ready for him. And they flung me onto the gurney, took me in. I felt them go up my arm. I was still conscious through the whole thing. And they went up my arm into my heart and pulled the clot, and it was instant relief. All that suffering that I didn't really realize it was that bad, but it must have been because I could barely breathe. It was all gone. And I said to the doc, I feel great. And then I passed out. I remember waking up in the recovery room hours later going, hell of a morning, and then I said, you really do believe? Because I recalled the series, and I was never afraid to die. And I'm like, guys came in and said, were you scared in your mind? I'm like, no. What's the deal? Well, I knew where I was going. And I was just like, man, this was a blessing. Like, I can honestly say that my faith was revealed, and I could feel it, and I could just pray a prayer of thanksgiving. Well, I guess there's more for me to do. And so let's get back to work. And those kind of moments, I wish everybody could experience, because those moments give you a depth to your belief that everyday life can't give you. And then a few years later, then I have a similar experience with my good friend right here. And maybe you can tell that story, because these are two crazy stories that, he was supposed to come to our workout, which is at his facility. And I'll tell the beginning, and then you can tell. We get down there, and he's not there. And I'm like, is the guy human? He slept in. So I call him, because he never misses a workout. And no answer. So I call again. No answer. And I'm like, dude, I told the guys, Crafty, he must have slept in. So let's go down the back door and see if we can get in. Sure enough, it was unlocked. We get in. And we start our workout without him. And I'm like chuckling to myself, like, I can't wait to bust his, what?
Yeah.
And then I see this woman who's the head trainer for all the trainers at Ohio State. And I was never afraid but I was afraid when I saw her, because I knew I wasn't supposed to be in there without him. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm busted. And she comes over and says, do you have Tom's wife's number? And then I think all the color left me, because then I was like, oh shit, what's wrong? And then she told me, and next thing I know, I'm at OSU with him. And why don't you tell some of that story and what that did to your faith?
Yeah. So, with Chet, when he said, so I've worked out with him so many times, and I think earlier we were talking about just something that's just so important is knowing where your treasure lies. Like you gotta that has to be settled. Like, where is your treasure? And I know exactly where my treasure lies. Like, where my treasure lies, and then where your eyes looking. And when it's, I think I had 1,500 text messages the morning or within days of this accident.
Mm.
And my daughter and I were talking about that after I recovered. And but it was, I know, and I was just watching Landman. There's a show out called Landman. It's really good, really good. Billy Bob is in it, Thornton, and Jerry Jones in his last was just on the show, and there was a scene where he's talking to this really wealthy. It's an oil movie. It's like a Yellowstone, only based on oil wells. And he basically talked about his family. And at the end, when it's all over, when it's all said and done, you got to know, you got to visualize exactly the way you want it. If it's going to end the way you want, what would that look like? Like, my treasure is, I want my family around me, right? I mean, I want my kids that want to be with me, not be there because they've got to be there. Like, there's no place they'd rather be. So just really knowing where your treasure lies. And Chet has my team do this, and I've obviously done it. You might have talked about this the last time you're with him, but he had us all write out our I believes, our I love tos, and our I ams. I mean, these are things that we've got to settle, or the world will settle them for us. So in this particular case, when we were biking, I was biking with Chet, I've never seen him cower. I'm like he's never wimped out.
Yeah.
So when he said he wanted to pull over, for me, he's taught me, right? You're always teaching somebody something, right? If they're paying attention at all. And he's always taught me, I can guarantee he'll hang in the bar longer. He'll do more setups, like he's tough. And when he said he wanted to pull over, for me, it was immediately an emergency, because he would never do that. And by God's grace, I happened to be about 1.5 miles from my house. They picked me up, as he said. My house is only 1.5 miles back. So I went back and rode as hard as I could for 1.5 miles to get my car and then get him. But my situation, my scenario was, I was coming to work out with him, as Chet said, and I hit a tractor trailer that was parked on the highway at about 70 miles an hour. And it was, I was one, without question, singing a song by Elevation Worship called Trusting God. Because every morning when I would go in, it was Tuesday mornings when we did get together at the place, I pick a song, and that's my song on the way in. I just keep playing it over and over again. In fact, I listened to Believe by Brooks and Dunn 72 times in a row from Michigan back to Columbus. The only song I played the whole way home.
I remember that.
It's amazing. One of the best songs ever written, I think.
We're going to listen to it on our way home.
By Brooks and Dunn. It's called I Believe.
Yeah.
And the math just worked. The 72nd time I was pulling into my driveway from visiting my daughter and her husband in Michigan. But this, on April 23rd, Tuesday morning, I hit a tractor trailer parked on the highway full speed. But thank God it was just a steel, it was the truck and the steel, what do you call that? Just the trailer.
Yeah.
Truck and trailer.
Truck bed.
Yeah. And then it's been a journey. My faith was really tested through it.
Did you go unconscious?
I was unconscious for about for 10 minutes. I was unconscious, and I woke up to the car door being cut off. That kind of woke me up, and I was like, "Where am I?" And the EMT said, "You were in a serious car accident." I'm like, "What?" And then I said, "Please don't touch me. I'm in a lot of pain." And that's the last thing I remembered. Until about 5 days, I had glimpses. I remember Chet, I was in the ER, and I remember Chet kind of holding my hand. I was looking up. He was the first person I saw. I remember a couple of moments, but really it was about 5 days after the surgeries. I had to have my left leg completely repaired, and they used the flesh from my right leg and brought it over to the left leg. And then, but the healing process, I think, was the big thing for me, which was, I really struggled. I really struggled for about 4 weeks with everything about life. Like I just didn't want to live, which is just so
in you,
right?
So incredible. I mean, like my life, I almost couldn't have mapped my life out better from where I'm at right now and how great it's been for so long. But it hasn't always been rosy, but it's so good right now. And I was going down a rabbit hole with my faith, because it's like, well, God loves you regardless, and God, and all this stuff about my faith. And it was like, well, where is my faith? Like, where's your faith? Like, you're faithless. Like, and you go down this rabbit hole of feeling like God's got you, and everything's going to be okay. And it was really challenging for me, but good friends and a lot of open communication about how I was feeling mentally came through it. Yeah. So my recommendation is to not hit a tractor trailer at full speed that's parked on the side of the road. But
to draw it into so much of your life's opus, right?
Yeah.
And in some capacity, that is an ultimate moment of unchosen suffering. Obviously, I don't know if that qualifies under what you say.
Yeah.
I'd say it does,
and to tie it full circle for your listeners, he didn't choose that one. You know, it was pitch black coming around a turn on an on-ramp. There's no lights. He did not have his running lights on. So the tractor trailer was blotted against the blackness of night. And as his lights hit it, he was on it. And I think I want your listeners to understand, like, there are going to be things that just hit you upside the head. It could be anything that no amount of prep could prepare you for it, right? And you're going to be knocked out, and we're going to have to cut you out of some mess, or you're going to have to cut yourself out of some massive mess. And there'll be moments where you may not want to keep going. Okay, that's when the doubt has surpassed your faith. And these moments do occur where you're going through something, and the term overwhelmed is applicable. And he was overwhelmed with all kinds of pain, all kinds of painkillers in his system, he had a 23-hour surgery. The amount of anesthesia that wrecks your system for that long, combined with the pain meds, would overwhelm just about any mind, right? And it overwhelmed this strong one. And so I want your listeners to realize, like, that's when you rely on other truth tellers around you. You rely on your faith. And you've just got to persist in baby stepping and keeping going and not giving up. And that's what I saw this man do. And I watched him do it firsthand right next to him. I wasn't sure he'd ever walk. I mean, I looked at that leg and it looked skinnier than mine.
I remember.
He said, I'm not looking at much. Well, I'll tell you what. I looked at that leg and I'm like, what have they done? Where did he go? And now I cried the other day. I didn't tell you this, but it was a good cry. When I came in, it wasn't the day we were having practice with the team. I was just coming from one practice to another, and it was in the room next to the wrestlers, and I heard them in there. And I had Feldman was on the recovery bike, and I knocked on the door, the door. He opened the door, and I went in. Because I just wanted to see if he was in the room. And not only was he in the room, he was bouncing around the mat, barking out orders, getting on these guys. And he didn't look any different. And he was moving. You know, he wasn't wrestling, but he had his whistle, and he was barking, whistling. And it just made me cry. Like, that's why we persist. Mm-hmm. You know, like, you're going to get knocked down. You're going to hit hard things, and you're going to be overwhelmed. And you just got to keep persisting, keep baby stepping. The road to recovery for many, from alcohol, from drugs, from success, from a divorce, stuff's going to break you temporarily, right? But don't let it break you permanently. And you got to keep that faith. And then you got to have people around you that tell you, you got to keep doing, you got to keep baby stepping. You got to roll the play in this. And he's not afraid of hard work. All that chosen suffering has enabled him to choose the kind of suffering he had to choose to get his life back. And it's just an unbelievable story.
I think too, in retrospect, like looking back at that time when I was just, I mean, I don't know, I don't understand anxiety very well because I've never experienced anxiety. But so people that have had it, I'm like, well, or have it, and I talk to them like, well, use facts against what you're experiencing, but it doesn't matter, right? Sometimes they're feeling it.
Yeah.
And for me in this scenario with this, where my mind was feeling, it reinforced. We had a student athlete share once, it was Kyle Snyder, about how to not trust your feelings sometime. So that was one thing. If I trusted my feelings in this situation, I might not be sitting here,
Right.
or how low I was. And the other thing, for just for people that listening is I was incredibly open with the way I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Like I shared, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm seeing. And then the people that are close to you, they all stepped up. I mean, people started coming by and stopping by, having dinner, having dinner with me and just talking to me and just really, you need people. You need to rely on others. It's like I as strong as I think I am, I wasn't strong enough to handle what I was going through.
Mm-hmm.
It was with my family, my kids, everyone knew where my mind was. So
you're really, and that's a great point. You were not shy on telling your daughter and your bride.
Yeah.
I remember getting a call from Lynette on one day saying, you got to get down here. And it was because you'd been talking to her.
Yeah.
And, like there's so many times when, your friends want to help, but if you don't talk to somebody, you don't know. You could be in a dark place. Grappy got out of it by being open about it. And I think there's a good lesson there. And we're probably out of time. I told him we were going to do an hour.
What are we at?
We're
This
over
is
an hour.
Chet's show. Didn't you know that?
Yeah. It's my show, isn't it? I mean, come on, Grap. How much more can we say?
Well, I really appreciate you guys sharing those stories. It just to hear the moments of truth that you were faced with, right? And ultimately, that's when our faith is tested.
Yeah.
Both in God and in ourselves too.
Yeah.
Right, together.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things I've learned and one of the things I'm working hard on internally is to do the work in getting to know my I believe statements, my I am statements, my I love tos, doing this work now. So when these inevitable unchosen suffering moments come, when these inevitable moments of truth come, I'm not left there wondering who I'm looking to.
Yes.
But I know who I'm looking to.
Yes.
And my core, is strong.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, literally as well.
Yeah. Both.
But
Both.
yeah,
Amen.
well, as just as a parting question, because this is an I Can Fly episode.
Oh yeah.
And we're missing our fourth, or my partner in this venture, Morgan Hoffman, who you would really enjoy. And Morgan, you said earlier about when someone has an encounter in these moment of truths that you feel a different presence about them. Morgan was given a sentence and a diagnosis, through muscular dystrophy. And it's one of the things that drew me to him was when you meet Morgan and when you talk to him and you hear him speak, and most importantly, when you feel his eye contact, it is so raw and present. And I believe it's because he has had an encounter with his mortality in some capacity.
Right.
He's had that moment of truth put right in front of him. He's just a beautiful soul, and he's always with us in spirit if he's not here in the chair. So, but the title of our podcast is I Can Fly. And I'm curious, Scrappy, when you hear the words I can fly, what does that mean to you? Or what does that feel like to you?
I can fly. I think it means to me that connects me immediately to my Creator. That when I'm in touch with Him and living in His light, that I'm at my best. I can fly. I can do whatever. I can do whatever if I'm when I'm in line with Him. Yeah, that's what it makes me think of. I can fly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
I love that.
I do too.
Now we'll root on our Buckeyes for the national championship next week.
Let's go. Let's go Bucks, man.
Yeah.
I'm excited
was fun.
for them.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you guys very much.
Thanks for having me.